So I believe every tool out there can be a weapon, or it could be something to build with. Like a ball peen hammer, you could build, you can also shape metal with it. You can also kill a person with it. And I believe that everything needs to be done in moderation, or it has to be done with specific intentions. Just like if you want to be a monk and go into complete isolation or solitude, depending on what verbiage you want to use for introspection. You can stay in therapy your whole life, but you're never actually having a chance to really test it, to be able to understand it, to really live. But when you're talking about actually shutting down your emotions, and I really hope we get a chance to talk about the law enforcement aspect of it, it's a very it's an irky feeling because everything gets shoved into this box. I call it Pandora's box. Good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you get a chance to listen to this. I have the pleasure of interviewing Jessie Holton. He served in the United States Marine Corps. He was a 15-year law enforcement officer. He is now a doctor of evolutionary psychology. He is continuously giving back to individuals. A welcome, Jess. I'll let you actually fill in any of the blanks that I missed.
Yeah, so um kind of started out my life as your normal run of the mill kid in East Central Florida. Um Grew up in a pretty low income neighborhood. Kind of the average life for a kid. Did some sports in high school, didn't have the best grades to get scholarships, and then the only other options in that town is either jump into the workforce or go into the military because I definitely didn't have the grades for college. And so kind of took my time. I worked for a great franchisee with a Domino's Pizza who taught me a lot about management skills and stuff. And I graduated high school young. So I graduated when I was 17. So I had a while before I could really do much. And my mom had already told the Marine Corps recruiter to stay away from a house. So um, there was that. But then September 11th happened, and that changed everything. I was actually a dispatcher at the time, looking at getting into law enforcement. I was supposed to be going to the police academy in January of 2002. And so I was getting prepared to go to the academy. I'd work midnights. I'd come home and run in the morning. And after my morning run, I was about to take a shower and go to bed for the day. I watched the events of 9/11 happen live on television, and something just really hit me. I knew right then and there that the creator was pushing me to head towards joining the military, which I thought was really odd. It was, it's kind of new in my spirituality, so thinking that my God was sending me towards the military was kind of a weird thought. But I kept feeling it, and so I went down to the Marine Corps recruiting office the next day. That was closed because of the threat warning. But then I went down on the 13th. And I handed the recruiter a quarter because I was really confused about what to do. And I was like, if it lands on heads, I'm going to join the infantry and go serve my country. And if it lands on tails, then I'm going to go to the academy in January and I'll just go be a cop. And he laughed, flipped the quarter, and I saw the crazy grin on his face and asked me if I wanted to see it. And I looked down and it was heads. And he's like, you're really going to join the infantry based off of a quarter flip? And I was like, "Yep, give me the paperwork." And he's like, "Oh, you're just the right type for the Marine Corps." And so he signed me up, and I shipped out in November, and that led to 3 combat deployments. I did the invasion in Iraq in 2003, and then I spent the end of 2003 and 2004 in Afghanistan, and then went back on the MEU in 2005 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. So 3 tours. I got back. We got stop lost, so there was that. Couldn't get out when they don't tell you that when you sign your 8-year contract that they can hold you active duty as long as they want. But I got extended for a little while, and then my MOS opened up right before my 4th deployment was about to happen. I went home and happened to be eating in a restaurant, and the sheriff of the local law enforcement agency came over and paid for my meal because I was sitting with my recruiter. Both of us were in our chucks, and he paid for a meal and said if we ever wanted to be cops, that he'd pay for everything. And I was like, well, I get out in 2 weeks, or I could get out in 2 weeks. I'm determining on whether I stay in. And he just laughed and said, "Get your ass down to the academy right now, and I'll get you in." And sure enough, I drove down to the academy. It was full. I went to walk out, and the dean said that the sheriff had just called, and I was supposed to get in. So I drove back to Lejeune, turned my stuff in, and literally 16 days later, I was a civilian sitting in a police academy class. And
So before we go jump into everything, you just dropped a huge bomb, probably about a good 5, 6 years worth of stuff real quick before we just jump into everything else. So some people don't know what chucks are. Some people don't know what the invasion was like. Some people don't understand the disconnection about actually leaving the service, what stop loss mentally would do to a person, about leaving a place. And I just want just to slow it down just a hair.
sure, yeah, yeah. Where do you want to go back to?
So you played sports, you grew up in over in Pennsylvania, you said,
Florida,
and
East Central
Florida.
Florida. Yeah.
Sorry, Florida. Were you a two-family household or was it just your mom?
Um, well, it was sporadic with that. We have 4 kids, 3 different dads. Stepdad is the one that kind of raised me. He was in law enforcement. My mom ended up, she was in law enforcement too. She had had some pretty abusive marriages prior to that that we were exposed to. So there's kind of that, which ended up playing a role in my law enforcement career. But
Yeah.
yeah.
The reason I want to start back right from the beginning because a lot what I've noticed over the bunch of interviews and then also doing my job as a peer specialist, a lot of individuals that join the Marine Corps or join the Army, especially the infantry, they're looking for more masculine role models to be around and actually being able to engage and not understanding how to be a man at one point or having like certain traits of not what to do, but how. And this is what has become a common theme. The how'd you how'd you feel after that coin flip, after the heads and tails?
You know, I had throughout my I would say my young teens, you know, as a kid, there was a lot of internal conflict with stuff that was going on. You say the absence of a male figure. I had a pretty good role model as far as my stepdad, but at the same time, there's this aspect of abandonment. And what I mean by that is you have a biological father who, as a, and my stepdad came in the picture a little bit later as a kid, but you know, you always have this want to connect. And I remember days where he would, you know, he'd call the house and say that he was coming to pick me and my sister up because my older brother had a different dad, and then my younger sister had a different dad. And me and my middle sister, we had the same dad, and we'd get all excited and sit out there and wait and wait and wait, and he'd never show up. Um, and after a while, that really starts to destroy a kid. Like, why does your biological father want nothing to do with you? Meanwhile, I'm watching my older brother hanging out with his dad. I'm watching my youngest sister hanging out with her dad, and you feel missed out. And so I started, and I where I was in age wise, like my brother was 4 years older than me, so he had his friends. My sister was a chick, so she had her friends, and then I was kind of in our neighborhood. I was kind of split. I didn't really have a lot of close friends, um, and so there was always this spiritual kind of earning, and I started get tapping into that at a very young age and listening to it. And what I tell a lot of people is, you know, the Holy Spirit found me. I didn't find the Holy Spirit. I started listening to this thing. I could feel the Creator talking to me, not by voice, but like by emotion. Every time I saw the Marine Corps, I was fascinated with Marines. There was something that was tugging me towards Marines. And that's why at 17, I wanted to go in the Marine Corps, but my mom had talked to the recruiter and literally told him never to come back. But I'd always felt drawn to it. And then when 9/11 happened, the first thing that popped in my head was Marine Corps. And I knew that that was my creator. And I've always followed exactly what that God has wanted me to do. And that's where I was kind of conflicted because at that time I was like, you know, my creator is a person of peace, love, joy, and, you know, forgiveness. And then Marine Corps, I'm like, that's kind of the opposite. Um, but I followed what I was told to do. And when it landed on heads, it was, yeah, it's a scary moment because you're joining the Marines, which everybody knows the fear of boot camp is what drives people to the Army. So um, at the end of the day, it was like, well, if this is where you want me to go, I'm good with it. And so I've always had that like burn the ships mentality. Like if this is where I'm going, there's no other option. So burn the ship and step forward. So I jumped into the Marine Corps right in the deep end. That's where I was supposed to go.
I will say the one of the biggest challenges I have had, and I know actually quite a few other people, is thou shalt not kill, but it's okay if you do it under the military. Thou shalt not kill. It's okay if you're following a certain type of perspective. And for quite some time, I actually struggled with my religious beliefs based off of what I did in the Marine Corps, what I believed if somebody actually knew what I did. And then the real struggle where it became where it's like, how is this okay? And this is not. We're doing the same thing. And so I totally get what you're saying about that. And I've seen quite a few people struggle with that emotional or moral dilemma of what they actually been through. And doing 3 tours in the Marine Corps, especially in invasion, you guys went over there soft shelled. You guys had Humvees that didn't have up armored. You were just I don't know if you guys did it, but there was I heard about people trying to get different types of steel and putting on the doors wherever they could. They were I hate to say it like this, but they were rat fucking everything just to be able to give themselves just a little bit more protection.
Mhm. Yeah, my funny story, little sidebar. When I was in, I let my mom know. She worked for the sheriff's office as a civilian that I had been applying to and ended up going back and working at. Um, they got over like 650 used and expired bulletproof vests that they shipped to us that we used to line the bottom of our Humvees because we were soft shelled. Because during the invasion, we didn't see too many IEDs, but when I went to Afghanistan, I got hit 3 times, and it was when you're and there's a caveat to it. I didn't want the up armors. They moved too slow. They were an easy target. Whereas our soft shells, I got we had IEDs go off, but none of our soft shells ever took a direct hit. When I was in the Army up armors that we were using, that's how I got hit every single time. They were just too slow and they didn't have enough speed. And so, but yeah, to your point, this is during a time when we didn't have the right equipment. Things were changing and evolving. Especially, I was on a CAT team, combined anti-armor team, and so we're 50 cal machine guns, tows, and Humvees riding around. You know, uh, we were told we will never fight in the city and we'll never fight in the mountains, and that's exactly where we were fighting. And so we had to come up with SOPs on the fly. Um,
Mhm.
it was tough, yeah, on top of all the other stuff that was going.
Then you guys were also under a lot more pressure of like, hey, we have no downtime. It's what people don't realize for people that are out in the field, they might be like, oh, they have some downtime, they can be able to relax. There's just one thing after another after another. And you're just dealing with stress, you're dealing with compounding stress. The stuff that you do with your buddies, you joking around was just a way to be able to break the tension. And yeah, the reason I'm bringing this up is because, like, at least for me, my first tour was the hardest. The second tour was not as bad as the first one, and I don't know if it was just because of the boys I was with, the guys I was with, or it was it the fact that it was just a new experience. Didn't know what to do and actually trying to move on the fly. And being a guy from Florida, not actually really being in the Marine Corps up to this point, not understanding like exactly the totality of like death and everything else. How was that for you when you started to go through these different moments?
Yeah, it was for us, especially the unit that I was in. I would say we didn't have time, and I saw this. We didn't have time to process much. And what I mean by that is, I joined and went into boot camp in November of '01. I got out of boot camp in February, and you know how fast that goes. And then I went right into infantry school. And then from infantry school, I graduated, got bussed across from Geiger to Lejeune to 2-8. And by the time you adapt culturally to what the hell is going on, um, we were sitting on a ship headed towards Kuwait. And it was like, all right, well, this is what I joined for. this isn't the typical Marine Corps experience, especially the NCOs we had ahead of us. These guys joined the military for, and they admitted this, for, to go to college and get the GI Bill and to get the benefits and,
Mhm.
to just kind of have something under their resume. They didn't sign up to go to war. Whereas a lot of the guys that I went to boot camp with, I remember we had 4 guys in my platoon that were between the ages of 28 and 34. And so these were individuals that signed up after 9/11, and they signed up with the mindset that, we're going overseas. And so it went really quick, especially in the invasion. I went 57 days without a shower. I went 3 to 4 days at a time without sleep. I mean, we were constantly moving, and you didn't have time to process anything. I remember after our first firefight, I looked over at my buddy and I was like, "What?" And we're trying to process this. It's like, "What just happened?" And like, I don't know, but that was crazy. And we're looking at each other with wild eyes. And before you could even process it, mortars start falling. And it's like, it's just one thing after another. So I remember we got quarantined in Al Qut, which is this. So all the stuff in Baghdad is still kind of happening. We've taken the city, but Qudai and Hussein are still out running around. Saddam's out running around. We've got Iranians trying to invade from the east, and so all this chaos is happening, and my whole battalion gets sick, and so they had to quarantine us and keep us protected. It was chaos. Um, and then very shortly after that, they're like, "We're sending you guys back to the ship." All right, and so we get back to ship, and I think for 30 days on that ship ride back to Lejeune, it was probably the quietest I had ever heard any of these Marines. Nobody said much at all. We're all just kind of still in shock about everything that we had been through. And we were, a lot of the guys that I went to SOI with were in 1-2, and 1-2 was attached to us in the Battle of Nasiriyah with Task Force Tarwa, and alive. Several of the guys the guy I stood across from boot camp with was killed in Nasiriyah. We lost a lot of guys there. 1-2 Charlie got hit really hard, and I had several of the guys that I went to boot camp and SOI with that were in that platoon. Um, so it was tough. We got back on ship and everybody's still trying to process. And then we get home. Well, and then on ship, they're like, you know what, you're going to get this little piece of paper. It's going to ask you some questions. If you answer any of them this way, you're not going to be able to go home. But if you answer them this way, everything's fine and you're going to be okay. Our gunny's like reading the questions off, and we're like just circling the stuff like, no, I didn't experience this. No, I didn't experience. And he's like, just sign it, give it to me, shut up and turn it in. So we did. And then we all went home for 2 weeks, which was weird. You're kind of walking around like a zombie, getting snapshots of all the stuff that happened. And then I get back to Lejeune and we have formation. So we got back in June of '03, it was pretty much July of '03. And then we found out in August that we were going to Afghanistan in November. And so it's like, holy crap, like we just got done doing the invasion. I thought we would be done. Like we're gonna be put up on a shelf and allowed to just sit back and relax. And it's like, no, by Thanksgiving, you're gonna be sitting in another war zone. And so then we had to get prepared for that. And it was a totally different environment. So you had to take Iraq invasion and kind of put that over here in a box and seal it up, because now we got to go fight in the mountains. And Afghanistan was a completely different experience. We were in their crosshairs. Iraq was a breeze compared to Afghanistan because we had the technology, we had the support, we had massive amounts of people on the ground. We had the superior advantage. Where in Afghanistan, we were out in Asadabad, which is the area, the province that holds the Korangal Valley, and it was during 2003, 2004. There was nothing out there. It was there was like one platoon of CAT, one platoon of 81s, some SF guys, a couple of SEALs, some CIA guys, and then a handful of Afghan National Army. And we were a 2.5, 3 hour helo ride from the closest U.S. base. And that was when people talk about walking through the valley of death. That was the Korangal Valley. It's the Asadabad, that whole province of the Kunar province was a hotbed, and we were getting hit all the time. I mean, you couldn't sleep. Rocket attacks, IEDs. They were up in the mountains. You couldn't see them. So it was a completely different experience. I went from Iraq, which was like really exciting and fun, and like I say fun, but it was chaotic. But You had A-10s flying above you, you had Harriers you could call in, you had artillery that you could drop down, but in Afghanistan, you didn't have any of that. It was just you and your boys and a lot of Taliban. And so that was tough. I got hit really hard with an IED there. That's where I got my TBI. Um, I can remember the entire incident. I can remember an entire week or two after that. And then I have an entire month of memory that's completely gone. I don't remember it at all. We were in Salerno and Sarobi and Jalalabad, and I don't have any memory of those. I have pictures of them, and my buddies tell me stories of what we were doing there. And I was running patrols, um, but I don't have any memory of it. And then I don't have much of memory from the time we left Afghanistan until we were already on the 26th MEU. And so there was no time to sit back and go, what just happened? We were just constantly moving. We deployed from Iraq invasion to immediately deployed to Afghanistan. We got back from Afghanistan and we even got our leave cut short because we had to do workups because we were the MEU battalion. And so next thing I know, I'm sitting in Israel, on as part of the MEU. And then that deployment, it's funny because me and my boys look back and like, oh, that one was nothing. We didn't have anything happen. And but we were rocket attacked. We were on our way home. Last deployment. I'm like, I'm getting out. I'm burned out. This is done. I'm done. And we stop in Jordan of all places to just and all the senior guys, the senior NCOs were allowed to sit back and chill. The younger NCOs were taking on their leadership roles. We're kind of transitioning the platoon position wise, letting new people take section leader positions. And so they went out to go play with the Jordanians, and we got to kind of just sit on the harbor and chill with the Navy. And 3 days into it, I'm sitting on post because I had to stand guard. Here we are as a sergeant doing fire watch. I'm standing guard and we get rocket attacked and the rocket kills the Jordanian I'm on post with. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, I remember standing there like rockets are coming in, everybody's hitting the deck and panicking. And I'm just standing there watching this guy bleed out on the back of a Humvee, shaking my head like it's never gonna end. And yeah, that was the last engagement that I had. And then I got back on the ship and me and my buddies kind of looked at each other because we got stuck on the ships took off and they left me and all my senior NCOs there to guard their stuff for like 3 weeks. And it was like, of course, this is the typical green weenie. And here we are trying to get out and we're stuck on this port. And that's when the processing started. All of a sudden we had 21 days to kind of just sit there and be like, what the hell have we just been through? The last 2.5 to 3 years was just a snapshot. And then you're looking back at all the things that you saw and you dealt with, and some of the stuff you're laughing about right then and there. But there's so much in that box that some of it doesn't come out until years down the road. And there was a lot of things that I now see in my behavior and how I am as a person that I can directly correlate back to certain incidences that happened when I was in the military. And it's been a process, and that's where therapy comes into play is being able to take a behavior and reverse engineer it to figure out where it came from. And then kind of come to terms with it and realize that maybe this idea of or perception I had of certain things is not what it's supposed to be because of this experience. And I've got to change the way that I see life and behaviors to be able to get out of that mindset. And it's been a ride, man. Holy cow! Is it?
Well, I could tell you right now just by hearing your voice, and I know you're a clinician and everything, you could just tell your voice went up. You went back to the time period. You could actually just see it in your face. It's the images are there because they're more like a trailing blur. The question I wanted to ask you while you were actually sharing everything, how do you feel about losing time periods? And what kind of emotions come up to you when you lost the time periods?
It's I always had trust that my faith, and I think that's been my lifesaver, is that, my creator would not have put me through this if every single piece of it wasn't specifically for a purpose. And that took a while to get to. There's been some ups and downs with my spirituality. There was a when I was in the Sadabad, there was a period of time where I felt like I had been left by my God and had to rely on my own skills, and that was a part of the process. Like the ups and downs of everything that we've been through, if you look back on it properly, can all be parts of how you evolve as a person. There's a
Mhm,
great reality out there called post traumatic growth,
mhm,
and Boulder Crest is the organization that kind of really pushes this out there for veterans. Um, but it is about looking back because it does question your core values. We go back to death and fighting in war and but yet we have this commandment from the Christian faith that says thou shalt not kill. But then you read the Old Testament and it's like holy crap, that's a brutal religion. Um, so there's this whole back and forth, and how do you process that out? How do you sit back and determine with your beliefs what is right and what is wrong? uh Sometimes we ignore it, and I think that's what I did for a while, was just try to ignore it and and I think a lot of veterans do that. We just ignore it and we go forward. It consumes some of us, drags us down, chews us up and spits us out. For some of us, we're just white knuckling it. um then at some point in time, you have to go open up that box. You got to pull those thoughts out. You got to process them. And what I like about post traumatic growth is it goes all the way back to the foundation of why we joined the military. We had this ideology, these core values and beliefs that said we're going to go do this because of who we are and our beliefs towards our society and life and spirituality. But then you go through things that question those core values and beliefs, and it starts making you have these perceptions of maybe my core values and beliefs are wrong. And so then you have these times spent with what they call it intrusive rumination, theories, ideas, and you question things, and then you reform your values and your beliefs, and they're skewed. They may be antisocial. They may be anti-relationship. They may be anti-leadership. And so those beliefs then transfer into your behavior and how you interact with everybody around you. And what you may find is the reason you push people away is because your time overseas and seeing things cracked your core beliefs. And now you don't trust people, or now you hate your leadership, no matter where it's at, because it could be, I've lost 5 jobs in a row. And here's, why. It's because you hold leadership to such a high standard that when you get out here in the civilian world and they're not up to those standards, you start being adversarial, and that ends up you become a target and they push you out. Um, so there's all these other things, and I've best part about being a clinician is I see how other veterans have gone through it and the tools they've used, and I apply them to myself, and I take the stuff I've used and I apply it to them, and we keep passing these tools on to what we find is there's so many areas of life where our values and beliefs are questioned, and then we change our perception, which changes our behavior, and then
mhm.
start having conflict. And so it's going back and reverse engineering that and figuring out, well, you know what? Yeah, this incident occurred, but I can't blame the leadership. I can't blame my spirituality. I can't question my beliefs just because I'm going through this process. I've got to grow from
So, Jesse, there's like hit on so many different aspects, like the DBT model of change your thoughts, change your emotions, change your behaviors, or change your behaviors, change your thoughts, change your emotions. You have the triangle where it can go both ways and where you want to disrupt it. The other part is something that they don't usually talk about as clinicians, don't really talk about to the patients, especially in the beginning, where I did a 13-week residential program and I did it with this guy. His name is Dr. Gately over in Long Island, New York. Love the guy. Blessed that I've actually got a chance to meet him. So I was on my way to leave the earth if this didn't work. We got into it. We started to go dissect the first major traumatic event. And it wasn't the mortars, it wasn't the firefights, it wasn't all this other shit. It was just like when I lost one of my friends. And when we dissected that time over 13 weeks, a 2-hour period, and how that actually changed a lot of my behaviors of how I interacted with people. I was able to identify what emotions were there that were getting overridden by anger, or actually looking at how can I actually change it or skew it by alternative substances inside the body, like alcohol, marijuana, sex, dopamine hits. And once you start to understand these areas and you start to decouple the emotion out of the memory and become a historical event, you're not actually having the same type of trigger responses. And then all of a sudden you kind of get really confused. You get into this void area. And they didn't really talk about this that much. But when you get to that void area, it's super fucking frustrating because it's like you're saying, challenging your core beliefs. Now all of a sudden I'm on autopilot. I'm pressing this button, but I'm still stuck here now and having the option of what I want to do to change. And what we don't have is enough people to actually say, hey, it's okay. This is frustrating. You want to go back to automation. You want to be there and just move on to the next part because it's predictable, or going back to familiar feelings, familiar belief system, familiars. But then, depending on what age you're at, you start to look at your manhood or your womanhood. You start to look at how people actually either failed you or actually you looked up to, and you're starting to change. So I agree with you, but it's so intertwined where we don't talk about that enough. Where when we start healing, we want to go back to everything else. Let's say if you're an alcoholic, oh, I got rid of my PTSD, but I'm still going to be an alcoholic. Well, was your alcohol based off of a genetic component? Was it also off a trauma response? Was it off of a way to distract yourself? What was it going on inside your brain? And I'm looking forward to you being able to break this down scientifically, like you were beautifully, eloquently saying before we jumped on this call. And I was like, dude, we got to stop. I said, I'm going to have you talk about this in about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
So what you're talking about is when, and that I go back, DBTs are great, but one of the problems we have is our brain will go back to its learned behaviors faster than it will change. So for example, the one way I try to explain this, there was a YouTube video of a guy that was like, how fast can you take something where you've learned muscle memory and change that behavior? It's very hard. Um, so he wanted to learn how to ride a bike backwards. So you got to pedal backwards, you got to turn the opposite way, you got to brake forward. Like everything was the exact opposite of what he had learned. And so trying to do it in like a normal setting, it was impossible. So he like set up something I think this is how the story goes. He sets up something in a parking lot, like sets up an obstacle. And after a period of time with no distraction, just focusing on the actual movements of the behavior, he was able to get through the obstacle and he learns how to ride the bike, but in this setting. But the minute you leave the parking lot and the safety of no distraction, which kind of like goes back to inpatient. So when you take a veteran or anybody from substance use and mental health and you stick them in an inpatient setting, you're removing the distractions of their environment. You teach them these things and you get them to strictly be hyper focused on thoughts and beliefs and core values and emotional regulation and all of this. But then you put them back in their environment where they have to go back into the speedy life of society. The minute that an obstacle comes in front of them, they're going to immediately go back to revert to the motor muscle, to the muscle memory, and they're going to go back to their old behaviors. And so for us, when it comes to using things like DBT, it's very easy to fall back into intrusive rumination because we've been doing it for so long. And it's when you look at how the brain functions, that's an automatic reaction of fight or flight. Now, veterans, cops, people that have high stress coming from childhood trauma, our fight or flight system is overstimulated, meaning it's muscle memory. So when you can have all these tools, but there's going to be certain periods of time where you hit a benchmark of stress where your body's going to go back, your brain's going to go back to those old behaviors. And so what I like about PTG is it starts out with that aspect of let's see what your core values and beliefs are. It uses emotional regulation to identify what emotions you were feeling at that time. It creates that trauma dialogue. And then it gets into the abilities of what they call direct rumination, meaning I'm going to teach you how to recognize when you're in intrusive rumination and get yourself back to direct rumination using things like finding a purpose or the values of life, the things that you actually care about, and start seeing how you can take this trauma and shift your thoughts and direct them towards things that are going to be positive and create growth. And you don't just do it by yourself. They have this component called expert companion, which is kind of like, we all know peer support is so important in treatment now, that lived experience. The expert companion is kind of a mix between a mentor and peer support because they've got the lived experience, they've got the cultural aspect, and they've walked down that path to where they know how to use this modality in their own life, and they're able to teach somebody else how to do it. And so it's not just about you trying to take this modality and do it yourself. It's having 5 or 6 people you're connected with in life that when you find yourself going into intrusive rumination, you contact one of these individuals and you process out your thoughts. And I love it because it goes back to the fire team mentality. Um, you leaning on your think about how many times you had these, like, I don't call them war stories because you mentioned it earlier. It's the dark humor therapy session with you and your boys, is the stuff that you guys talk about. When we're doing that, think about this from a really unconscious perspective. We're laughing, which is why they call it dark humor. If you really look at what we're doing, is we're processing trauma through a directed ruminated standpoint where we're taking what we went through and making it comical and turning it positive emotion. We do this subconsciously. We've been doing it subconsciously for a long time. And so how do you take the science of that and then turn it into an actual purposeful modality? And it, but also removing the dark humor piece. And that's what it comes down to, is we've gotten way better at understanding how the brain functions, especially like we were mentioning, and what I'll kind of roll into is the aspect of choice. Do we choose to be alcoholics? Do we choose to allow trauma to create antisocial beliefs and behaviors? Do we choose to put up walls and barriers to separate ourselves from relationships? Do we choose to always have one foot out the door when it comes to, creating romantic or intimate connections because we don't want that fear of being abandoned? Like, these are all behaviors that people think that we're choosing to do, but they're not an aspect of choice. And a lot of people struggle with that, especially when you're the one doing it. Our biggest conflict is that we're doing behaviors that we don't understand why we're doing them. And at the same time, we can't change those behaviors. And so there's the insecurity piece of being mad at ourselves for, you know, our relationship issues, all the other things that come into play. We start sitting back and kind of questioning who we are, not because of our values and beliefs, but because we know what we're doing isn't necessarily what we want, but we continue to do it anyways. And so now you have that aspect of negative self-preservation, and we fall into that cycle, and you have no growth and you have no purpose, and then you kind of assume the fact that you're just a broken person and this is the life that you're going to live, and now you're stuck. But that's not the case.
I kind of want to actually rewind and actually stay even here at the same time, rewind and being here. You talked about actually like inpatient or residential. For some people that don't know the difference, inpatient, what it is that you're under a locked room where you can only be exited with somebody with a key card or a code. You're under surveillance every 15-minute checks, and you have a 300-pound chairs. What they're doing is everything in their power to be able to plan for you not to be able to hurt yourself. The residential program is you're living there, you're sleeping in the beds, you have less oversight, but you still have a lot of people watching you. And going back to between that and actually pretty much learning this in an echo chamber, or not even echo chamber, but like pretty much like a silo. You go back to your friends and your relationships, and like what you were saying before about the choices. Like you have actually created all your friends, you created these relationships, you created these patterns, you created even like even if you're married or you have people that love you, even though they want you to change, they still want you to be predictable and they still want you to be familiar. And if you have this radical change, this radical perspective, they're going to deny you. And sometimes they're even going to meet you with resistance because they are distrusting of what is actually happening. And talking about dark humor, I think about it is, I know I'm using another DBT thing, it's opposite action. Being able to laugh about something that actually once actually would be hurting us. And now going back to choice, what you're saying, and mind you, I'm nowhere near as educated as you, but this is just my perspective on this, where we don't usually have choices because everything has been primed very to a cellular level. Like to me, when I smell burning bodies, which I don't smell often, it just sends me right back to sensory memory, sends me right back to somewhere else. When I hear doop, I will actually sometimes question about what's happening, or even seeing potholes or seeing things hanging up from the wires. Even though I know I'm here and I've been here a lot longer, your brain is wanting to go back to an automated response. So yeah, and this actually happens with substances. Hey, I've been stressed the fuck out. I'm gonna go use alcohol. I'm gonna go use marijuana. Or I'm gonna use something else to distract, which then starts to become this other thing. I just want to tie it all back together.
Yeah, and that's where we have to understand. A lot of people don't understand the functions of the brain. It is such a unique aspect of our life, and and I'll kind of dig into that aspect of choice here, because why is it that when you look at a telephone wire and you see something on it, you're automatically going back to a pathway where that was used to be able to to fight against us by the insurgents, and so you're looking for IEDs and you're smelling these. Why is it the brain goes back to these memories and then benchmarks some of the things that we did after that? And it's kind of unique because the brain does an immediate snapshot. It'll go back to that wire that you saw overseas, but it also touches on 3 years later when you were hanging out with your buddies and you were getting trashed talking about that event. And then it also goes to how that event created an argument with your spouse. And it does this extremely fast. You don't even think it's unconscious. And then after you get done looking at that wire, all of a sudden you get a craving for a Budweiser. All of a sudden you have agitation towards your relationship. These things occur and we don't know it's consciously happening, but it's what the brain does because these memory pathways are burned in our brain, and these memory pathways touch the limbic system, which then creates the chemical reactions of the emotions we felt during those times. And so then now we have to think back of, but you still have a choice on whether you're going to go drink or whether you're going to go home and have an argument with your spouse. But that's not the case. This is where the seed of intrusive rumination starts, because you see the line, the brain hits this electronical signal where it hits all these different memories. And then as you're driving down the road, you now have a dump of cortisol, which is the negative stress hormone, which shifts you to that negative emotion. And now when you start thinking about your spouse, you think of your spouse with negative, or what we call intrusive rumination. You start thinking about the arguments that you've been in, and you start thinking about the attributes that you don't like and how it'd be easier to be by yourself and that you're just broken. And you spend your time going through this spiral of rabbit holes, is what we usually call them. And every time you're doing this, you're adding more and more cortisol to your system, which traps you in the limbic system fight or flight mode to where you cannot get into rational thought. And so I think now is a good time to kind of break down what a choice is and how the brain works on that so that people can kind of understand how all of a sudden you end up in a bar drinking a fifth of whiskey. And so we talk about choice from it's a process of thought. And when we want to know what a choice is it's the decision to either do or do not follow through with an act. And so the first thing that has to happen is there has to be an aspect of risk, meaning I'm about to do something. I'm about to make a decision. And this decision can have more than one outcome. And in these outcomes, I have to figure out whether or not it's worth taking this risk to be able to do this act. And so a lot of people can understand that. But let's break it down even further. The first thing we have to do when it comes to this process is we have to take every bit of information that we know about this act that we're going to do, and we have to lay it out basically on a table, and we have to start putting together the puzzle pieces of cause and effect. And I call this our brain housing group. For those of you in the military know what that means. But it's your basically your file cabinet of information. And in this file cabinet of information, you're going to take everything you've learned from the time that you were little till now, and you're going to connect it to this act. So what people don't recognize is for example, if I started drinking when I was 8 years old with my dad, what information do I have in my information box about alcohol use? Right there, it starts out that it's okay. And that the person who I admire and I love and has such influence over me gave me a beer at 8 years old. And that symbolic interaction between him and I, now all the emotions of connection and being accepted by my dad all comes down to a can of Budweiser. And so now the information in my information box is going to be completely different from somebody else who is taught that alcohol can lead to alcoholism and alcohol makes bad decisions and alcohol can kill people and all of the science behind it. And so what we realize is that not everybody has the right information in their information box. And that information can be skewed. That information can be completely absent. They may have never been educated on alcohol use. And it can get even deeper because I've got clients that are veterans that started smoking meth with their parents when they were 12 years old. You have socioeconomic factors, you have cultural factors, you have all of these things that can really disrupt the information in your information boxes. So now when you start to create cause and effect and consequences, you now have invalid information, which creates invalid answers. So moving on to the next piece of that is the ability to process. And so when we decide that we're going to start putting together these cause and effects consequences, we look at the cause. If I do this, then the effect is going to be this. And unfortunately, in our human brain, when we do cause and effect, the effect is the positive emotional response it will get. And this is where people don't understand choice. Every single thing we do in our life is driven off of chemical reactions in the brain. You hang out with people because of the emotional reactions that they give you. You don't hang out with people because of the emotional reactions they give you. And emotions are nothing more than chemical reactions in your brain that are stimulated by either positive or negative interactions. And so when we look at cause and effect, if I do this, this happens. The effect piece is the initial positive interaction that we're going to have. So what kind of positive emotion am I going to get from doing this act if this occurs? And then we start going down all of these possible outcomes and labeling them with the degree of positive effect that we could get from making this risky decision. The second part is we go back through all of these responses that we think are going to happen if we do this, and then we look at the consequence side of it. The consequence is the negative emotional reactions that can happen. And so then we look at the negative side of it. What bad things could happen to us if I do this event? So we have the first part, which is the positive, the consequence, which is the negative, and then we start having to weigh them out. This negative response is too much, so therefore I'm not going to do this act. The issue is our brain also has to go further than that, meaning not only in the consequence section do we have to put negative emotions on ourselves, but to advance it further and process it further, we have to look at what negative consequences can happen on others. And so the first part of it where we look at ourselves, that's your guilt aspect. The second part where we look at what it does to others, that's your shame aspect. So you have guilt and shame. So that when you really look at the thought process of choice, it comes down to this. I have to have the right information in the right information box. I have to have my brain, my executive functions, my frontal lobe in a mindset to where I can process every single outcome that could happen. Then I have to properly label the right effect to it, positive effect to it. Then I have to label the correct negative emotional effect that can happen to me, and then the negative emotional effect it can happen to others. So that all has to occur in order for me to make the right choice. Now, this is where I'll kind of toss it back to you. Knowing that your frontal lobe has to be an executive function to be able to do all of this, what kind of things can stop that from occurring?
The way that I'm looking at this, the way it's actually consciously trying to bring everything back to the present. And really thinking about it, taking a chance to look at it from a logical perspective, and really dissecting what the emotions are really telling you. Because when I think about the limbic brain, the limbic part of the brain is heavily controlled by our emotional responses or survival responses, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. That's where you start to have your logic brain, your emotional brain, and then you have your pretty much what they call the wise mind of it. And when you're actually paying attention to it, you have to be able to start challenging each emotion, but you also not even just challenging it, you have to understand what emotion is trying to tell you. And when you're starting to understand what the emotion is, and this is what I learned from one of my chaplains, once an emotion is understood, it's no longer an emotion. And I had to really sit with that statement before. But when I think about how you're going to challenge this, you have to be looking at it logical. What information did you have? Going back to the analogy of drinking a beer with my dad at 6 years old is showing acceptance, is showing that I'm loved by my dad, or doing math at 12, like you use another one, and saying, hey, what am I actually learning? These are the people that I'm supposed to role model. But this is where I take it a step a little bit differently, where I forgive my parents and I forgive the people for understanding that information of what they had. What new information am I going to take in? Love them for what information that they had at that time. But now I also have new information about how to be able to not just do what monkey see, monkey do, but to be able to see monkey saw, he understand what they were doing, but now I'm choosing to do something different. And the other aspect that I take it a little bit further than that, because we're always going to have our slip ups, is to be able to say, cool, you slipped up. That's great. Outstanding. We're going to do it better next time. Not getting frustrated, not getting emotionally overworked, not getting stuck in that little bit of a pothole, metaphorically speaking, and just being able to move on. And this is where I believe we have to come across with a lot of empathy, a lot of courage to be able to challenge our belief systems, really look at it logical with the most amount of information. And this is why I'm really grateful that you brought this on. That's how I would actually handle the situation.
Yeah, and and what you're mentioning is going back in addressing, so our core values and beliefs come from that information box. And when we look at the biopsychosocial aspect of treatment, the reason that it exists this way is because the social piece is the information you have in the information box, the stuff that has started from the time that you're a kid. How you've created and built your core beliefs is all intertwined in that information box, that social piece of it. And so what you just explained is going back into your information box, taking out the information that's incorrect and putting in new information. So now you recognize that alcohol is smoking meth and all this stuff has created negative things. And so now when you go back to your aspect of choice, you now have created a proper equation of cause and effect by taking out the negative information and putting the positive in. We call that in therapy psychoeducation. So you're looking at the social piece and taking out the bad information, putting in good. But here's the issue. Let's look at things from a biological and psychological standpoint. Going back to the limbic system versus the frontal lobe, neocortex area of the brain that does all our executive functioning. If I can't get into my frontal lobe is not functioning properly. I still can't create cause and effect, consequence, and attach the proper emotional reaction to each one of those because my processing brain is off.
Uh-huh.
So, biologically, genetics, when you have someone who is genetically, their genes just create brain dysfunction, meaning they already have oversized amygdalas, their hippocampus doesn't function properly. You have some type of genetic factor that does occur, not very often. Those are kind of like your sociopathic style people that have those behaviors. It starts from birth. There's some type of dysfunction. And so immediately their ability to assign proper emotion is completely dysfunctional. But on another biological side, you have things like head injuries, concussions, strangulation, IEDs, uh, all of these things, poison. A lot of people forget that a lot of the reason we had the PACT Act is because the stuff that we were breathing in was causing literally biological dysfunction. So it's when we talk about like killing brain cells, it literally is blocking the brain's ability to get into executive function. And so now all of a sudden you have biological factors that keep someone stuck in fight or flight instead of being able to move forward and shut that down and get into processing brain where they can actually have their executive functions. The same thing happens on the psychological side. If you have individuals that start out with emotional disorders from childhood, whether it's from trauma or neglect or abandonment, whatever it may be, during that brain development, you have overstimulation of the limbic system, fight or flight, fawning. So this starts to occur already. Now you add military trauma, military sexual trauma, combat trauma, whatever other societal aspects you put, work related stressors, relationship stressors. The more you stimulate that limbic system, the more you are overgrowing it, it literally grows and it will become so much in control that it stops executive functioning. Meaning, now what we've done is we've disrupted the process of choice. So instead of going cause and effect consequence, and you have to look at it from this perspective. If you're scared and you're sitting in a situation, like say you're in a room and it's very fearful, and all of a sudden an escape door opens, you're going to run out of that room through the escape door to the safe space. When the limbic system is in charge and we're trying to make a decision, instead of us going cause and effect, assigning positive emotional connections to each one of these, and then going through the consequences process, we immediately take the avenue of least resistance to the best outcome. So we actually stop the process of cause and effect when we hit the first effect that's going to get us relief.
Mhm.
And so what ends up happening when the limbic system is, we call it the amygdala hijack, the limbic system is taking over our process of choice. This is where trauma and paranoia and anxiety comes into play, is the minute we are trying to make this choice of if I should do this act or not. Let's say like I'm about to go to the bar and have a drink. My limbic system is telling me that the only door open for me to go get relaxed right now is right here. And so you stop thinking about, well, I'm going to violate probation. My spouse is going to get mad. All of the consequences that are the last part of the actual process of choice are no longer looked at. We don't even assign an emotional value to it. We don't even think about it. We immediately go to the path of least resistance and we make an invalid, emotional, irrational choice because we're needing the escape. And that's our brains get used to that cycle. And it's nothing we can control because we can't get into the processing brain. And so over time, going back to kind of like the bicycle analogy, is over time that becomes a learned motorized behavior, meaning the minute I start to hit this benchmark of stress, my brain is immediately going to pull me into fight or flight. I'm going to find the path of least resistance. And I'm going to tell myself, like, well, I'm just going to have one quick drink to calm my nerves so I can think. And so a lot of people struggle with understanding how this works. And so the best example that I like to throw out there is most people at some point in time have burned their hands. And burns are one of the most painful, physically painful injuries you can get. And for those of you that have, you know what it's like. The minute you burn your hand and you stick it under cold water, and all of a sudden, every bit of pain is gone. It leaves. And so we leave our hand under the cold water and we sit there and tell ourselves that as long as we let the cold water run on it, we don't feel pain. And after a little while, we'll take our hand out from under the cold water and the pain will no longer be there. But that's not what happens, is it? You take your hand out from under the cold water, and not only does the pain come back, it comes back at the same intensity that it was before we stuck it in the cold water. And it immediately our limbic system takes over. And what is our reaction, Will?
Goes back under the cold water. But I wanna actually, before we get too far into this, and I'm wondering if you're going to hit on this, like Angela Duckworth talks about with the book Grit, and there's another person, Heartworn Battle, about resiliency. When you're actually discussing this, are you also teaching people how to be more resilient or acceptance commitment theory, be able to sit within the emotions? I just want to be able to make sure we're going down this route as well.
Yes. And that so
Okay.
That's the other side of the spectrum. So you have this aspect of sticking your hand. So you stick your hand under the cold water, and the irrational thought that you have is that if I keep it there twice as long as I did the first time, I'm going to be fine. So you do that. You shut the water off. Guess what? The pain comes back. You try to bear it. You try to get through the grit. It hurts so bad. You turn the water back on. You stick it under there. But here's what's unique, and this is what people don't realize. While your hand is under the cold water, you are thinking to yourself, how am I supposed to get out of this situation? And at some point in time, somebody has to come along and tell you, like, look, we have to take your hand out from under the water. There's going to be pain. It's going to happen. But that pain will eventually go away, especially if we put some ointment on it, bandage it, and treat it. Yes, there's going to be some pain, and I'm going to be here with you while you go through it. And there is going to be some, but you will eventually heal. There will be a scar. There may be some residual pain, but we know that eventually life goes on. The other side of that, which is what I consider the kind of the way veterans white knuckle things, is we start to learn to enjoy pain. And we get a different aspect of what we call resiliency. And there are some veterans out there, some people they don't have to be veterans, they're just dealing with trauma, where all of a sudden that becomes our crutch. Being miserable, we fall into dealing with the pain as more of a therapeutic piece. But here's the problem: that's not resiliency. And so when it comes to discussing resiliency with my clients, I tell them that we have to be very careful, because here's why. In our society, men judge each other based off resiliency and grit by looking at the calluses on our hands. But I want you to think about something. What's the definition of a callus?
So it's continuous. I actually don't know the definition, but I know how it's actually achieved is by continuously ripping and tearing and then building up harder skin so it's able to endure much more tearing and ripping.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. But here's what's unique. Callus is nothing more than dead skin that feels no pain. We don't want to do that to our brain and to our emotions. We don't want to become so resilient that we actually become callous, meaning, and this is where I became. Nothing bothered me anymore. I didn't have love, joy, and happiness. I was just callous, meaning I had gotten through the hard part. My hand was no longer under the cold water. I could take the pain because it didn't bother me anymore, because I had become emotionless. A callus is nothing more than dead, hardened skin that can't be affected in a positive or a negative way. And resiliency is one of those things where we have to be careful. And that's what I do like about the post-traumatic growth piece, is it's not teaching you just how to get past the pain and how to become callous, because you can become over resilient where now you don't care about relationships. You don't care about people. You lose your compassion. You lose your empathy. This happens a lot in law enforcement. There's terms for it, compassion fatigue and all this other stuff, is you become so resilient that you actually do the opposite. You become callous. And we have to be careful with that. And so resiliency is where you're allowed to get through the painful part and allow new skin to grow and be healed and move forward with life. And that's where resiliency should lead to growth, not to being callous. And we have to be careful with that.
So I believe every tool out there can be a weapon, or it could be something to build with. Like a ball peen hammer, you can also shape metal with it. You can also kill a person with it. And I believe that everything needs to be done in moderation, or has to be done with specific intentions. Just like if you want to be a monk and go into complete isolation or solitude, depending on what verbiage you want to use for introspection. You can stay in therapy your whole life, but you're never actually having a chance to really test it, to be able to understand it, to really live. But when you're talking about actually shutting down your emotions, and I really hope we get a chance to talk about the law enforcement aspect of it, it's it's a very it's an irky feeling because everything gets shoved into this box. I call it Pandora's box. And once you open it, you don't know how to understand how happiness is, or how loneliness is, or whatever. and you're trying to do everything you can just to close up that box. But as soon as you start to explore it, it feels overwhelming. It feels oh bothersome. But being emotionless sucks. It is just existing in this world. I say you're surviving at this point, and you're not really living. I remember having this conversation with a bunch of therapists. The Marine Corps taught me how to survive. It never taught me how to live. When you go, and I think you appreciate this, but when you kick in a door and you're clearing a house, you're supposed to just keep clearing. If one of your boys gets shot, you keep clearing. You come back for your boy afterwards. You have to turn off your emotions. And I really hope we actually, like, again, we're talking to the law enforcement aspect because a lot of people don't realize what first responders go through. And they'll say, oh, military, you guys dealt with this complex stuff, you're away from everybody. But law enforcement, they go home. No, no,
Oh,
no, no.
that is the furthest from the truth. And
And
so,
yeah,
kind of tapping that real quick, just to kind of hit it is, we looked at different variables between law enforcement and veterans as far as what they deal with, like head on a swivel, dealing with death of comrades, constantly having that threat assessment going on. Issue there's two different variables that we have to look at when it comes to the separation of veteran and law enforcement. Is one, there's no end of deployment. Your deployment's 25 to 30 years. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no a couple of months away from here. Whereas when you're overseas, there's this the deployment's going to be over eventually, and I'm going to be back home pretty soon. I mean, one of the things we always said in Marine Corps is you can't stop time. Well, when 30 years is your time limit, you don't even look at the clock. There's no aspect of that satisfaction. The other side of it is the people that you are fighting for. When you're overseas fighting the military, we are representing our people who are back home in the United States. Every single one of them, no matter what creed, color, race, whatever it means that they come by, we're fighting for all of them, and we are fighting the enemy of the state. In the United States, as a police officer, the people that are trying to harm you are also the same people that you are swearing to protect. So there's this psychological twist to it where it's like, I'm here to try and help people. I have this thing in my heart. That's the same reason I joined the military. Is the same reason why I became a cop. Is I wanted to help people in my community, and I wanted to, be a part of being a servant to society. But yet these are the same people trying to harm me. So there's a psychological twist there. The other side of that is you don't get to go home. And what I mean by that is I can't tell you how many times where I've gone to a restaurant and there's somebody that I've arrested, or I go to a kid's soccer game. I worked crimes against kids for the majority of my career. So I did child forensic interviewing, having to do with child abuse and sex crimes. And here I am trying to enjoy my nephew's soccer game. And two of the kids on his team know me because I interviewed them because their uncle molested them. And so you cannot get away from it. One of the reasons I left Florida, moved to Montana, is I couldn't drive through my town or any neighborhood in my entire county where I hadn't worked a death investigation or rape or a domestic homicide, some type of traumatic. I mean, imagine going back to living in the war zone that you were in. And so there's a whole different huge piece of the first responder side of it that we forget about. And it's not just cops. My brother was a fireman in the same area that I was a cop, and we worked child deaths together. We worked officer involved shootings together. We worked homicide. He was the medic. And so some of the same traumas I was seeing, he was seeing. And it was no different than having the doc next to you who might not be shooting at the enemy, but they're patching up the guy that just got dropped, while you were searching a house. And so all of that comes into play, but you don't get to escape that environment, and it's there. And in order for you to escape it, you got to move and you got to get out of the occupation. So there's a whole nother aspect to the first responder side of it that we often forget. In fact, when my brother came to me and said that he had been diagnosed with PTSD, I mean, I knew why. I knew some of the cases that he worked. I knew some of the stuff that he had been bottling up about, not being able to save a certain kid or, work in a different case, a traumatic event. But he's like, no way, I can't be diagnosed with this. This is for vets. This is for you guys that deployed overseas. He's like, yeah. But at the same time, he has no idea that while we may have walked different pathways, those pathways were still full of rocks and we weren't wearing shoes. And it's not much different. And there are other components to it. And so what I've done out here is combining that process. Is I learned a lot on how to deal with the stuff that I was seeing as a cop from the treatment modalities that I was getting from the VA, dealing with my stuff from overseas. Um, in fact, it all ties together. It's kind of unique that I mentioned it earlier in the beginning, like things that I had experienced as a childhood fed into things that ended up being in law enforcement. And one of the reasons I worked crimes against kids is I was almost kidnapped. I lived in Florida during the 80s when John Walsh's kid, Adam, was kidnapped by a Walmart. And then we had several childhood kidnappings where kids were killed by sexual predators. And so there was always this fear. You're always told to not walk alone and all this other stuff. Well, a child predator tried to kidnap me, and he ended up getting caught. I ran home, and my parents were able to go out and they intervened, and the cops came out and ended up catching him. Um, but I had run up to a police officer on my way home that was stopped on the side of the road and had somebody pulled over. And I was so terrified because this guy was physically chasing me. And I ran up to the cop and I looked back and he was gone. And I couldn't talk to the cop. I was so scared that I couldn't talk to him. And he told me to go away. And I did. I walked away. And as I tried to keep running home, the predator took off back after me. And so that little bit of childhood trauma not only spurred into my law enforcement career, but I also had experiences overseas where kids came up and they were so scared to tell us what was going on, that they couldn't talk. And then that's when I ended up in law enforcement, getting into crimes against kids and becoming a forensic interviewer and developing the tool of using a therapy dog to interview child victims to be able to try and get kids comfortable enough to talk. So that's one of those trauma pieces that goes all the way back from my childhood. I experienced pieces of it in the military, and then it ends up becoming a passion of mine when I get out and into law enforcement. And oftentimes we don't even realize I didn't connect all of those dots until later on in therapy when I was doing DBT. And it was like, I became a dad. So that we're talking 20, 30 years later, I'm now a father, and the father lens comes out, and I start having all of these issues with, connecting things that happened overseas with children with my own kids and having intrusive thoughts, and had to break all that stuff down. And I would have never known any of that if I hadn't had the courage or the understanding to go to treatment and put the work in to really dig and understand it, and then kind of see it all, and then go back to those core values and beliefs and realize, like, yeah, there is a reason I'm doing this. It's not, I don't have to get over paranoid and protective over my children because of all the things that I've seen. I need to allow them to be kids and allow myself to be a father, and then separate what I've done as a cop and as a Marine and as a kid. And so wouldn't have been able to do all that if it hadn't been for the continuous evolution of treatment to help us understand what's actually going on inside the brain. And it goes back to those aspects of reverse engineering what trauma has done. Understanding that most of the time our choice isn't inhibited by our values and beliefs. Our choice is inhibited by the psychological, biological, and social dysfunction that has to do with the aspect of choice. And then that's where therapy comes in. Just like you said, we dissect the aspect of choice and look at that social influence, and we take out the bad. We put in good, and we fix the information piece. Then we look at the biological and the psychological piece. How do we get someone chemically balanced enough so that their processing brain can come on and make proper cause and effect consequence choices? And so that we don't end up making these knee-jerk reaction choices that end up resulting in later, when our brain does finally get balanced, we go back through that behavior, and now we see the consequences. And that's where shame and guilt robs us, because then we start getting paranoid of our insecurities, and we start just focusing on shame and guilt, and that keeps us trapped in that amygdala hijack. And now we're making more and more irrational decisions. And that's where a lot of people don't understand that the aspect of choice is more than likely caused from the disease piece. And the disease is nothing more than the biological change of a certain organ that causes dysfunction. And so for cancer, it's tumors or carcinogens that enter the body and create some type of organ dysfunction, which results in death of the organism. heart disease, nothing more than cholesterol entering the system, high levels of a certain protein that causes it to crystallize. It gets stuck in the arteries, the heart overworks, and results in death of the organism. Substance use and mental health affects the part of the brain that has to do with the ability to make proper choice. And so from the very beginning, whether it's a small trauma or lots of stressors, we call the big T, little t stuff, and the addition of substance use along with the socially learned irrational, information that we have, it immediately affects the aspect of choice. And because of that, the choice spiral ends up resulting in more irrational decisions. And that's where the disease comes into play. And we have to, as therapists, just like you were mentioning in your example, we have to reverse engineer that. We have to dissect it from a social, psycho, and biological perspective and say, okay, what areas are in dysfunction and what tools do we have to be able to address that dysfunction and get this process working like a well-oiled machine. Then all of a sudden what you will start to see is proper choice starts to be made. And now
Mm.
you start getting someone back into function instead of dysfunction. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. While you were talking, I was thinking about how the body keeps going back to homeostasis, regardless of the fact if it's a healthy homeostasis or a negative homeostasis, until that actually gets moved into where it should be, the equilibrium part. How much our food actually impacts the way that we think, how much the stress, the inflammation, the delayed of it, the sugar, the alcohol, substances. So my brain was processing all that while you were talking about the physical, and then also the mental as well. Yeah, it's gnarly to think about how a lot of what we believe, or I'll say the ignorance of what we did not understand back in the 1990s and 2000s when they had that huge dare kick, just stop. Or they had this one dude, he actually said, just stop it, just stop it. And he was like, he gave people 5 minutes of his time to tell them in therapy, just stop it. And they don't understand why they're doing it. Telling someone to stop doing something, white knuckling it, using the terminology that you used before, it's like, how long are we going to hang on to that bar? How long are we going to be able to hang on that bar when it's greased up once in a while? Or when the bar starts, like, starting to spin. How
Well, and
long. Go ahead.
you mentioned that too, and it goes back to the unconscious social aspect. So you have this gentleman who sits in front of somebody and says, "You just need to stop doing this." But then that person, while they're sitting there, they're watching this. What's the gateway drug in the United States? A lot of people argue whether it's alcohol or THC.
I say
But
trauma.
if you sit down and look at it, where's the first time you as a human being in our society see somebody taking a purposely taking a chemical to change their mood? And it's caffeine. And so a lot of times I went through this myself. I have this therapist that's sitting there telling me that I need to just stop it. I need to just recognize that what I'm doing is wrong and I need to just stop. Meanwhile, they've got 5 coffee cups sitting on their desk. And it's like you're literally using chemical manipulation to change your mood. And so, but that's an accepted behavior. Coffee is not only accepted, it's celebrated. Then you look at alcohol, the same thing. Like here's a good statistic for you. 30% of the population consumes 90% of the alcohol that we produce. That's a subculture. So alcohol is celebrated and promoted as a fun and good thing to have and work hard, play hard, all this other stuff. But at the same time, it's the most dangerous substance that's out there. It kills more people every year, even more than fentanyl. So you have this dangerous thing that is in society's view of it as being celebrated. Look at how our military culture looked at alcohol. I remember when I got dropped off at 2-8, I had to drink a 12 pack of Bud Light before I can carry my sea bag up to my third story, third deck room. And so it becomes this aspect of manlyhood. It becomes an aspect of cherished stuff in society. Now shift to the legalization of THC. We're seeing the exact same thing. And THC has changed a lot. So I have a lot of veterans that are like, you know what, I'm going to try it because it's legal now. Well, back in the 1990s, when we were looking at it, it was 3 to 5%. That was the highest you could get. where now all of a sudden it's, you can't even find a flower that's under 15 to 20%. And so we we have, as coping mechanisms, changed the way that we look at things from society. Like, if you go back 30 years ago and look at caffeine, coffee black was the strongest you could get, or Jolt soda. A lot of people, I'm aging myself here, but that was like Mountain Dew was the highest caffeine you could get. Now you walk into a 7-Eleven and look what you've got: energy drinks that have 4 times the daily value of caffeine that you're supposed to drink. And people are
Mhm.
drinking 2 or 3 of those a day. Um, it's In the last 30 years, social stressors have gone up so high. The reason we see high divorce rates, the reason we see high substance use is because our coping mechanisms have also gotten worse. So caffeine's gotten up, alcohol content, IPAs. I got guys that are drinking beers that are 3 times potent than the Budweisers that we used to drink back in the day. And I went into the store the other day and had this little thing called a Buzzball, 18% liquor. And it's like people are just grabbing 2 or 3 of those and drinking them. Concentration has gone up. Amphetamine, cocaine, it's so pure now that it's literally, back in the 90s, it'd be like 50, 60% pure. Now we're at 95% pure. Who'd have thought heroin was no longer relevant? And now we have fentanyl. So if you look at how our society has used chemical coping mechanisms over the last 30 years, we're just as sick as a culture as some of the people that we're looking at in our society saying, well, that's an aspect of choice. We're providing it. Go back to that social lens and look at how we as a culture promote chemical manipulation of the brain, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's chosen social chemical reactions from, recreational use of different substances. All of our coping mechanisms have gone through the roof. From, look at porn, the porn industries. You talked about sex earlier as being one of those mechanisms of escape. Everything we have used as human beings for coping mechanisms here in the United States in the last 30 years is off the charts. And yet we sit across from somebody who's struggling with the psychological and biological factors of it and tell them to just stop it. But then they turn around and walk right back into the lion's den of chemical manipulation. And so we have to get better, not only as therapists and as clients working together, but as a society. I mean, you mentioned earlier, like, the Marine Corps or in the military teaches us, and we laugh about this. They say boot camp literally breaks you down and builds you back up. They are literally doing that psychologically. They are breaking you down, removing those emotions of love, compassion, and empathy, and turning you into a mechanism of kill so that you don't have those emotions on the battlefield. But then we get to this aspect of, they don't train us to become civilians. You can't. Once you've done that, once that mold has been broken, you cannot go back to who you were. The issue I see a lot is that society is not prepared to have us reintegrate back into it. Meaning, it's not just about us learning how to become a civilian, it's about a civilian population learning how to let veterans adapt back into their society. Meaning, we need to have mechanisms of control when it comes to substance use. We need to have understanding, compassion, and empathy for some of the behaviors that we have. We need to find employment pathways and housing pathways that allow these individuals to ease back into society, not just get thrown back into the pit with emotions and behaviors that were great in the battlefield,
Mhm.
but I shouldn't have to send you 5 emojis in an email to make you feel good about yourself. And they need to be okay with that. Whereas we're the ones that are broken. And so there's this aspect of, how do we solve it from both sides? We have to work on ourselves. We have to get better in treatment. At the same time, we also need to address society's flaws and start looking at some of those. And one of the things I push with my veterans and first responders that I treat is the only way our country is going to grow. And if you look at what's happening in our society, yeah, we're resilient, but a lot of our country has become very callous. We have to learn how to take resiliency and turn that into growth.
Mhm.
And what better populations can we do that with than our veterans and first responders who have experienced the highest levels of trauma in our society? And then from there, helping civilian victims of sexual assault and abuse, and people that are struggling with mental health and substance use, and individuals who are justice involved. If we can get back in and start helping them out and getting them into a better place of life, using the tools that we've used to go from trauma to growth to resiliency back to growth and continue that cycle, we will heal not just as individuals but as cultures. And that's the big piece. And what better way to forge that forward than teaching our veterans how to do that, leading from the front, taking on that fight, and winning it.
So a lot of the things that you brought up, which the increase of the flour to 10 to 15%, 20%. I asked people, I said, do they even sell regular strands of weed anymore? Like, do you sell regular weed? It's like, what is that? I'm like, you remember that shit weed that you got with the seeds and the stems? That shit. No, no, nobody wants to smoke that stuff. I'm like, and they laugh about it. And when you talk about the higher amounts of alcohol, yeah, people quicker, faster, stronger. How to get drunk, how to make it taste better. What's the caloric intake on it? How do you make somebody actually increase the way that your brain is? I'll say a quick funny story about it. I was staring through the thermals of a 240 and just on a gun over in Fallujah, and I take a rip it, open it up, and then I take a stack or two and I pour it in there, and then I just pound it. I'm awake, but nothing's going on upstairs. And where I look at it, like we have took what the capitalistic or the industrial revolution, probably the third industrial revolution, where we actually have taken that from the macro sense and put it into all those different types of micro senses of how could we be able to get everything done at an expedited rate, and how could we be able to influence this? They have social engineering, or what you're talking about, desocializing it or reverse engineering, where they're able to tell a person where they're before they're pregnant, when they're pregnant, before they even somebody else even knows. They're able to make a hit song based off of theory, beats, and everything else. And this goes all into how do we prime people to be able to receive this information, to receive this type of like feel good, like food addiction. You have such a high caloric intake. You have alcohol, same exact thing. You have your marijuana, you have your meth, you have your heroin, sex, porn. I interviewed a porn addiction coach on here before. The rise in women watching porn, the rise in men watching porn. The least less sex that they have ever seen is between 18 to 28 years old in this 10-year span compared to any other spans. Because men are not even knowing how to have sex, women are not even caring. And there's so many different factors where people are sort of trying to figure out who they are. You talked about building bridges from both sides. You're right. You come home. Like I came home from Iraq my first time. When I came home, I remember pulling out of a gas station. I was on Long Island, New York. I was over by Stony Brook University, and I was made at a left hand. I made a U-turn, and the cop's like, "You know, why I pulled you over." I said, "I thought I was allowed to make a U-turn, sir." He's like, "Your lights are not." I was like, "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry," and I didn't realize because I got so used to driving with light outs, like with NVGs, and not being able to see anything. The cop started laughing his ass off when he pulled me over because he can tell I was I was scared shitless of him. I have my hands up here, my keys were up on the dashboard because I'm trying not to. I know how I treated people when I was overseas. And my brain is just like, is he going to treat me this way? And he started laughing and he's just, well, please just drive with your lights on. And we are not ready for each other when we're starting to come back home. You're kind of lucky in a way. You came back on a boat. A lot of us, we jumped on a flight from Iraq. We flew into Thailand, which is said we could only have 2 beers. In the Marine Corps, we're a cult. We drink everything. We drink everything. Now we get over to Okinawa, and they're like, "Hey, you guys are not allowed to leave base this night." Cool. Almost got into a huge brawl with a first sergeant and an LT over at the E Club. One of my guys landed up having his arm stuck up in the shitter because he landed up passed out drunk. It's just you don't know how to act. You don't know how to behave. And you're coming back to a place, you say walking around like a zombie. I don't know if you remember the movie Hurt Locker, but the scene that always stuck out to me is when he was walking down a cereal aisle and he was looking at the cereal. And he was just like, "What the fuck am I doing? Just send me back. This this doesn't make sense." And coming back from a place where you have had complex PTSD and complex trauma, it's like you feel so alive. Something that we don't ever really talk about much, but think about how present you were in a firefight. Think about how here or in the now you were. You didn't have a chance to think about what's going on at home, what's actually this. You're thinking about how you're going to interact within the next few seconds and how you're going to be able to move. And you have all these other choices that's happening. It becomes paralyzing. You're like, hey, can I just slow down my brain? My brain is overloaded. I have too much information. I want to stop thinking. Oh, I know how to do it. Fuck, alcohol is legal. I'm gonna go get drunk. You know what's also legal? Let me go smoke some pot. Oh, they got this thing. It's called indica. I'll just be able to just chill out, mellow out. But at the same time, I kind of look at it as what we're doing is we're putting a crutch. Actually, not even a crutch. We're actually just taking the stuff, putting it over onto the side, allowing it to build up faster. We're not actually cleaning it out. And the integration of how we are as humans, and hence why I started up this podcast about normalizing men's mental health, is because it's not just veterans, it's not just first responders. Men in our society for the years have not been able to talk. We have talked about generationals of people all the way from the primitive way. To kill is to be able to provide and put food on our table. We If you are not being compliant, guess what happens? Death or physical or bodily harm. And we could say, okay, we're in this whole new generation. You got to think about how much of this generation has actually been ingrained in us subconsciously, how our rules are, how our laws are. How are we going to be able to have a chance to reverse engineer this if all we are caring about is more of the hyper capitalistic perspective? And I'm not saying capitalism is bad, but how do we actually get the most out of everything, bang for the buck, and just stripping everything else, all the other information away to be able to get the quickest way of compliance instead of actually being able to say, okay, let's sit here.
Well,
You're
you nailed
okay.
it when you talked about the Industrial Revolution. Going back to the original Industrial Revolution, there was a reason they came out with 40-hour work weeks. There was I think the paper was by Emily Durkheim, which was the Protestant work ethic in the capitalistic nation. And what it would talked about was the brain can only handle so much. And when you start working past 40 hours, this is back in the 1920s. It's been 100 years. Things didn't get better, they got worse. And what I mean by that, the reason the government came up with a 40-hour work week is that what they started seeing was suicide, substance use, and divorce rates, and crime started going through the roof when, as a society, we start past 40-hour work weeks. But what's happened since then, and you can take the aspect of trauma from an individual and look at our society. And so, from the dawn of time, when Americans were America was created, it was always through conflict. Every generation experienced multiple conflicts, whether it's the War of 18 Revolution, War of 1812. We got Civil War, we got all these conflicts, World War One, Great Depression, World War Two, Vietnam, Korea. Everybody's always been through this hyper aspect of conflict. And with that, what we ended up doing was creating generational competition. So your parents wanted you to live better, so they trained you and treated you to work harder. Their parents did the same thing to them. So instead of going from a 40-hour work week, I think right now, when you include how much time people spend on this thing, we're working 60 to 65 hours a week. And it's not the capitalistic format that people are focusing on. It's the social perception. We as a society, and this goes specifically to men, we grade ourselves as men based off of how much we provide and what we give to our family. And that is completely wrong. That is a social perceived behavior of my manhood is based off of how big my turbo is in my truck, not how much time I spend giving emotional needs to my family. Now, when you look at the traditional family of women, being at home with the kids and kids being there, they speak in emotion. They follow their biology. Men don't. We have been taught since the time we are little to suppress, 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 meaning, toughen up, don't cry, hold your emotions in, don't ask for help. And because of that, what ends up happening is when your biology as a little kid is telling you, I want to hang out, I want to impress my dad, I want to have him look at me like I'm great, and he hands me a beer, what did I just do? I've completely distorted that. Now, the reason he's handing me a beer is because he's working 55 hours a week. He's exhausted. He's doing exactly what you were talking about is I just need a break right now. And then here comes little Johnny wanting to hang out, and he's not in the right mindset to be able to give little Johnny his emotions. So he drinks a beer. And then he hands little Johnny a beer because now they can both sit there and enjoy this together. And what ends up happening is you create this social conflux of where everybody is starting to learn this behavior. Now, where we start having the separation between men and children is because of that suppression of emotion. Kids are starting to learn not to follow their biology. All of us are designed to follow love, joy, and happiness. If you look at every decision you make in your life, anytime it's a positive decision, it brings you love, joy, or happiness. We're biologically designed to chase those chemicals. But if you're taught to suppress those chemicals because of social carrots that you're supposed to be chasing, you're going to find some way to be able to get those emotions. And what does society teach us? Caffeine, alcohol, THC. And when those stop working, you move on to the harder stuff. And all it does is create this dysfunction. How do we get our society back to where it's supposed to be? You're exactly right. Men need to be in focus with their biology. They need to be in tuned with the emotions of not only themselves, but their children and their spouses, and realize the benchmark that society has made for us as far as how we consider ourselves successful men is completely false. To be a good man is to meet the needs of your family and raise your children in a happy, positive environment and care and need for your spouse so they can do the same thing. And we have gotten so far away from that. But that's where it goes back to that warrior mentality. A lot of the reasons that we struggle when we come back, if you really dig deep and you've been in that combat environment where and you were mentioning it with, you know, in that moment in time when you're in a firefight, your brain is working at a level that it's never worked at before. And there's a whole series. We could have a whole nother podcast talking about the different phases of combat and where the brain goes. Some individuals experience nothing but fear and they get trapped in that. It's the best way to explain it is it's like going and doing something you don't want to do, but you have to, like learning how to swim. At first, you're nervous, you're scared, you don't want to do it. If you're allowed to get out of the pool and never learn how to swim again, you're always going to have a fear of water.
Mhm.
If you push yourself and you get into the water and you are scared and you do it a couple of times, what ends up happening is you start learning to deal with that water with fear, but you're white knuckling it. And some combat vets experience that piece of it. So combat is something they don't want to do, and they would choose not to do it, but they know that if they have to, they'll be okay. And so that's another form of trauma. Then there's what the ones I said we cross that threshold where all of a sudden that fear turns into adrenaline, and we start wanting to go out on those missions. We start looking for it. There's still fear there, but all of a sudden you're getting addicted to the fact that you're learning how to swim. This is the kid that wants to go jump off the diving board now in the deep end. They are scared. They know that they're going to be scared, but they also are seeking that adrenaline rush at the end when they accomplish it. And so that's a whole nother form of veteran and a different type of trauma that they have to deal with because they start endorphin seeking when they get back into society. And then you have the next step. This is what I call the veteran that's dialed in. Like you enjoy going into stressful situations, whether it's combat or whether it's just a mission of task where you have to accomplish something that's really tough and hard. And you go into it with such a mindset that you're hyper focused and you love where your brain is during that time frame. Those are your hardcore operators. They're very strategic, very methodical. They plan out everything. And they overdo it, but at the same time they're addicted to the ability to accomplish something that they never thought that they could accomplish before. And it's not necessarily an endorphin dump, it's a confidence booster. And then what happens to those individuals is they get out of the military, and you can't find that anymore. There's nothing in the civilian world that gets you to that point. The jobs that you work don't touch it. And you fall into this aspect of depression because nobody gave a shit of how many doors you kicked in. Nobody gave a crap about that mission where you were against all odds and you and your boys came out on the other side. Nobody knows or cares about that. It's about turning in your TPS reports, if you caught that one coming from Office Space. But it's tough. It is a tough transition, and so we have to figure out where veterans are on this aspect, and then treat them accordingly. At the same time, if you take those same windows and you remove the combat piece to it, and you put social traumas, you put the socioeconomic disadvantages, you put racial stuff, whatever you want to put in those lenses, what you will see is as society, there are also individuals who are stuck in those same windows. And we have modalities to help people get past that and continue to grow. It's being able to assess them properly and give them the right resources so that they don't end up making those what I call knee jerk reaction decisions or having these false core beliefs about themselves or society that results in these continued negative behaviors that then other people look at as an aspect of choice. And now they degrade them and stigmatize them and continue to push them even farther away. And that's one of the reasons I'm at where I'm at now is I love working with justice involved individuals is because many of them, it's kind of like comparing the first responder to the veteran, many of them have a similar pathway. It may not have been, from combat or from dealing with being in overseas and fighting in a war, but their fight and the traumas that they got from their fight may be socioeconomic. It may be childhood sexual trauma. It may be physical abuse. It may be psychological abuse and neglect. Like the roads, one of the things that I always toss at my clients is we all come from many different pathways, but it leads to one door. And if we can start learning how to help each other out, using some of the experiences that we've had, we will heal our society as a whole. And I would like the veteran community and especially because a lot of us are men when it comes to that piece is learning how to not become callous, but also not fall into that aspect of alcoholism and substance use to where we are neglecting our families. Because on both sides of that spectrum, you're neglecting. We have to be there for our kids. We have to be there for our families. We have to be there for our coworkers. We have to be there for each other and we have to be there for our community. But what we've been stuck in is one side of the spectrum or the other. You either become substance use, criminogenic, and antisocial, or you become so callous that nobody even can connect with you. We've got to learn how to grow from that and find that middle ground where we are able to get in touch with our spiritual aspects, our purposes, and grow from our traumatic experiences and become happy, healthy people, and then spread that down to others.
So the way that I'm going to be going about that and my purpose and my mission is helping people give themselves permission. Give themselves the permission to even have that type of dialogue, to be able to discover what is actually going on and being able to feel it, to be able to understand it. Because we can hit them with the science. Some people, sciencely, they're going to be able to understand what you just said. Some people need somebody to hold their hand and coddle them while they're walking through it. Some people are going to need X, Y, and Z. And I believe the first thing is having somebody have the ability to have a choice. And there's a video out there. There's a guy, he's out there dancing. They said, oh, he's the leader. He's the leader of this mentality. The leader, they say, oh, is usually the hardest. It's the second one. It's the one that wants to follow. The second one to follow has the hardest decision because you're making the first person not seem like a kook and have the ability to open up. Many of us have not been able to find another leader or a person to be able to say, it's okay. It's okay that I didn't know what I didn't know. And it's okay that I don't need to keep trudging through the same direction of alcohol or being calloused or X, Y, and Z. But to turn around and say, yes, it's okay to change. It's okay to heal. I'm grateful for the experiences that I've been on. And I would love to share them with other people so that they understand. Hey, you remember that road that you're walking on? Yeah, that road sucks, dude. But so what'd you do? Oh, I turned around, but I went a different path. I decided to go somewhere else. And most people don't realize they have a choice. And going back to choices, it's I feel like that's where I want to be doing, and that's what I want to do with this mission. And honestly, everything you just said really resonated with me. And I'm like, holy crap, this guy is extremely bright. The way that he's able to break it down, all of his life decisions, everything from his childhood to his Marine Corps experience to law enforcement to his education. He's doing great work, and you are doing great work.
Thank you.
And I want to say I appreciate that. It's just like, what role are we going to pick up on the change of people's lives? We're going to need people that are able to walk beside us, and we're going to need people to help them out in different ways.
Well, and that's what we're biologically designed to do. And if it go, especially veterans and first responders, we go all the way back to that foundation. And you can remember this: the day that you really did sign your life away on that contract, there was more anxieties telling you not to do it than there were telling you to do it. But what was driving you when it came to that was that internal drive to help other human beings. Almost every single one of us, very low percentage of individuals are biologically born without that ability to connect, that intrapersonal neurobiology to want to help another human being. In fact, helping another human being gives you more of a positive chemical reaction than it does the person that you're helping. So we are literally biologically designed to help others. The problem in our society is we have been taught to not help others. And that literally goes down to the aspect of men looking at help as a sign of weakness. And we have to get away from that. The other side of that is understanding the difference. And I think this is where society has a problem is we have to understand the difference between helping someone and fixing someone. If I'm trying to fix someone, I'm trying to push them to the benchmarks that I have, not their benchmarks. If I want to help somebody, I want to know what their benchmarks are and help them get to their benchmarks. And oftentimes, I think in therapy, it goes back to the guy you mentioned. Telling somebody to stop it is someone who's trying to fix someone. They're trying to push somebody to meet their benchmarks. But what we've recognized with society is a lot of times the benchmarks that people are trying to push others to get to are social norms and they're flawed. We need to push people to follow their biology, follow love, joy, and happiness. And it doesn't matter if you have a turbo diesel or a 5 bedroom home on 2 acres. What matters is that you're home with your family and you're creating an environment where you're not only at homeostasis, but you're experiencing love, joy, and happiness to create a healthy organism. And that's where we've been missing. And we're seeing that on a societal perspective. The reason our country is divided and angry is if you took therapy from an individual and put it as a society, you could diagnose us with post traumatic stress disorder, high anxiety, chronic depression, and we have substance use disorders out the ass. And so we are a very sick nation. And the only way for us to get better is just like we treat the individual. It's addressing one thing at a time. We got to hit the social, psychological, and biological factors that are occurring. And,
Hmm.
and it starts with here. It starts with people like you creating a podcast so that 5 or 6, 10, 20, 30 people hear this and then spread it to 5, 6, other 10, 20. And that's where that social change starts to begin. And what better way to do it than forging it from the veteran community? Because that's what we do.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. That's one of the things I'm going to continue to do. And Jesse, one of these days we'll get back on here again and we'll talk more about breaking it down from different components of how the brain is able to process. And thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for making this time happen.
Yeah, man. Anytime. Like I said, I'm here and whatever I can do to help you grow this movement, let me know. I'm right down the road, literally. So, yeah, we'll take it to the next level.
Appreciate you, dude.
All right, man. Sounds good.